There is a tendency to picture Japan throughout the Middle Ages as a nation where samurai clans, who ruled the time period, carried out their duties with honor and valor. On the other hand, there was another aspect of the samurai that was cruel, haughty, and tyrannical throughout that time period. The Japanese people were subjected to the most severe forms of torture, punishment, and tyranny in order to maintain their control over the Japanese populace. Hello, and welcome to Ancient Tone, where we will provide you with the most bizarre facts from the history of humanity. Today, we'll investigate the barbaric punishments that were used in ancient Japan. Peasants should be punished. In theory, Japan in the Middle Ages wasn't that different from Europe in the Middle Ages. The king was the most powerful person in the country. A group of feudal lords, each with a different amount of power and wealth, would work under the king to help him run and keep his kingdom. The samurai lords of Japan, on the other hand, were not rude like European aristocrats. They were strict warrior rulers known as shogunate. The emperor chose the shogunate to be in charge of the troops and use it for his benefit. And since the emperor gave the shogunate all the troops, you can guess who was in charge now. In Japan in the 1400s, the ruler was little more than a puppet for the country's biggest and baddest gun. This made a huge gap between the general people and the samurai class in Japan in the Middle Ages. For people with different social classes, the rights to justice were different. People thought that shoguns and samurais were above the law because they ran the courts. To be honest, that was their best way to test a new sword. When peasants walk home from fishing, they might get the short end of the stick, or should I say sword, because the samurai might get angry at their joy. His first move with his new sword was to cut the peasant in half in just a few minutes. There was not even a fiction that everyone would get the same justice. It was clear that the shogunate thought they were better than everyone else. In the 15th century, they tried to strengthen their control over the country by making the laws more detailed and giving their loyal samurai retainers the power and duty to enforce the laws. This changed Japan into a police state where the lives of farmers didn't matter much. In that time, justice was pretty much an eye for an eye. People were supposed to pay back every crime they committed in the same way they were owed it. If paying back wasn't possible, the thief was made to go through the same pain that other people went through. People who set fires were burned at the stake, thieves had their hands cut off, and women who were found guilty of small crimes were forced to work as prostitutes. However, Japan did not have this kind of gender bias. For the same crime, men and women were punished the same way. China, on the other hand, usually gave women lighter sentences than men for the same crime. Alternative executions to hanging. In places that still use the death penalty, hanging by the neck until death is a popular way to put people to death. To us, this may not seem like a very harsh punishment. This was not a good idea for Japan in the Middle Ages. Keep in mind that Japan in the Middle Ages had other harsher ways of putting people to death. Burning criminals to death was the second most popular way to kill them. Shogun wasn't afraid to cut people in half, whether they were men or women. Please don't think this is a David Copperfield trick. Saws were used to cut these people in half. The Kanzalahan were the ones who combined cutting someone in half with cutting off their head. Do not ask us why that had to be done. It was very rare for someone to be boiled to death in Japan, but it was the most unusual way to kill someone. In the same time period, the Mughal rulers in India were boiling anyone and everyone who dared to fight against their religiously based rule. Japan, on the other hand, only used this punishment for the worst cases. If you want to know about someone who was boiled to death in Japan, it's Ishikawa Gomen. It was Ishikawa Gomen's crime that his plan to kill daimyo Toyotomi Hideyoshi failed. He was then told that he and his whole family should be boiled to death. They had to sit in a big pool together and see each other die. Criminals chose all of these horrible and painful ways to die over being hanged for one simple reason. Being hung was embarrassing. People thought that being hanged was a shameful way to die because of the humility that came before and after it. Japan's ancient system of courts was unacceptable. People often didn't forgive major crimes like theft, murder, and rape, both because they hurt the victim and because they showed disrespect for the law and social order. These kinds of crimes left a bill that could only be paid off by giving up one's life. There was a truth to it that went beyond even the strict social order of feudal Japan. Low-class criminals were led around town before they were put to death, as if they were animals getting ready to be sacrificed. Criminals were also hanged in public, and their whole families were called out for being connected to a horrible criminal. This made them feel like outsiders in a society that was very critical. At the same time, these kinds of killings were filthy and low. Later, the heads of outlaws who had been put to death would be cut off and displayed on pikes to remind people of what they had done and to make sure that the family's wounds would never heal. Treason, the ultimate crime. Despite the fact that the judicial accountability of samurais, daimyos, and shoguns was significantly lower than that of the general rabble, it was nonetheless expected of them to maintain the decorum of their social class by avoiding becoming murderous fanatics. On the other hand, as was indicated before, the consequences of the crimes committed by samurai against peasants were significantly less severe. In some cases, it would even involve being placed under house arrest for the purpose of killing a large number of peasants or setting fire to fields of crops simply because a peasant glanced at them in an unfavorable manner. This exemption from persecution, on the other hand, did not extend to situations in which the individual committed a crime against other samurais or for the government. Seppuku is a sort of ritual suicide in which the offending samurai disembowels himself with a knife. Samurais who committed significant crimes were frequently given the right to do seppuku, or they were likely forced to commit in order to fulfill their obligations. In addition, the ritual included the participation of a second individual known as the kaishakunin, who put an end to the life of the samurai by administering a merciful blow to the neck as soon as the fatal stomach cut was finished. On the other hand, if you are a kaishakunin, you are not permitted to remove a head shaved clean. Despite the fact that they were intended to make a slashing incision that was deep enough to kill the victim, they were supposed to leave the head linked to the body by a single strip of skin. Treason was by far the most significant factor that led to seppuku. Shoguns and daimyos were exceedingly nervous about their power of authority, and anyone who spoke ill of them would be taken to court and charged with treasonary offenses. It was decreed that samurais and peasants alike would be punished in the event that they were found to have engaged in a full-blown plot to overthrow the authorities. The arrival and rejection of Christianity in Japan. In spite of the fact that ancient Japan extended a warm welcome to Buddhism, the concept of Christianity was met with complete and utter opposition in medieval Japan. In the Middle Ages, Japan was apprehensive of outsiders and viewed anything that was brought by them with a skeptical eye. Christianity was also viewed by the ruling class of Japan to be a tool of Western imperialism. Hence, it was apparent that the impact of Christianity was considered to be detrimental to the authority. There was a fervent desire among the daimyo and the shogunate to seek down Christians. In the event that they were discovered, Christian men were hung upside down in pits until they repudiated their beliefs and disclosed the names of other Christians who had converted them. It was far more difficult for Christian women. In addition to being stripped naked, they were had to crawl through the streets alone. After that, they would be put into snake pits, as if that wasn't more than enough punishment. In light of everything that has been discussed, what are your thoughts on Japan in its ancient era? Is there any of these penalties that you found to be the most extraordinary? We hope you liked this video, subscribe to the channel if you're a history addict, and please let us know about what civilization or time period we should talk about. Also, watch another video here.